Hi, I'm Robin Vitucci. On behalf of the AFT, welcome to Teaching. This is the fifth episode of our conversation series that gives real-time insights into the goals, challenges, and successes of two early career teachers. Each episode, our teachers are joined by a veteran AFT leader in professional development to hear their stories and provide some guidance on the journey of teaching. You can find this episode along with the others on AFT's sharemylesson.com. All episodes include accompanying links and resources to go along with the discussion. Now let's get into this month's conversation, civics instruction. Our teachers, once again, are Sam and Kelly. How about you two remind everybody a little bit about yourselves? Sam?
Yeah, I'm a seventh grade social studies teacher in Cincinnati Public Schools. This is my third year teaching and my second year in CPS. And prior to that, I taught in Columbus, Ohio, and in Chicago.
Thanks. How about you, Kelly?
Hi, yeah, I'm Kelly. I'm a second year teacher in a third and fourth grade autism unit in Cincinnati Public Schools, and I switched from a kindergarten autism unit last year at a different Cincinnati public school.
Great, and thanks for coming back and joining us again. And now I'm going to introduce our expert for this episode. Raphael Bonhomme is a passionate Pan-African educator committed to fusing social justice, project-based learning, and culturally responsive teaching in his classroom. With 8 years of experience in DC public schools, he brings a holistic and dynamic approach to education. A proud Howard University graduate of Haitian heritage, Raphael integrates diverse perspectives, historical context, and real-world applications into his lessons. Beyond the classroom, he has played a key role in curriculum development and has led district-wide professional development sessions on math instruction. His teaching style weaves history into math, art into science, and critical thinking into every subject, ensuring students see the relevance of their learning. Raphael believes in empowering students to view education as a tool for personal growth and social change. Thanks, Raphael, for joining us today. And now I'm going to turn it over to you to start the conversation.
Thanks, Robin, Sam, Kelly. I'm excited to be part of the journey into teaching with you. Very glad you are covering this topic. And civics education is the foundation of an engaged and informed society. At every single grade level, students should understand how their communities function, what rights and responsibilities they have, and how they can influence change. Whether it's analyzing government systems, debating ethical issues, or engaging in community action, civics should feel real and relevant to all students. So let's get this started. I want to know what you're doing in your classroom, how you're addressing civics with your students. Sam, the first at bat.
Yeah, so as a social studies teacher, civics is already, such a big part of the curriculum and something that I try to incorporate as much as I can. My class right now is ancient history, but there are a lot of themes in ancient history that relate to kind of civics issues, ethical issues, kind of what you were talking about with like basic functioning of society, but also trying to connect what happened so long ago to more relevant things happening now and connecting those themes to real world issues happening now. So some examples would be connecting the beginning of democracy in ancient Greece to democracy happening today and democratic issues we face now, or taking different themes and investigating current events. So we've done many units on like the Russian-Ukraine war and the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and really trying to give a space where when kids bring inquiries to the classroom, we can connect that to what we're learning. I also think that addressing politics and policy is dependent on the maturity of my classes and, mastery of key skills and content that are needed to have meaningful and respectful discussions on current issues. And I think I did a better job last year with some of that, guiding some of that maturity and mastery. And, maybe in this conversation, I could learn more of how to guide that better, and especially with younger students who are 12 to 13, still giving them a space to have these meaningful conversations, even though they still have you know, a child brain, right? And all that comes with that. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Sam, you said a lot of good stuff. Wow. I mean, the student maturity, the readiness. Some teachers should consider engaging their students in civics instruction by doing a few things, such as preparing them for conversations. I mean, some of those conversations, if you're not prepared, they're just going to come with something and it's going to shock you. So, especially as a new teacher, it really takes a lot of intentionality in trying to predict. Also, talking to some veteran teachers, they can really say, hey, look, that's not really a good idea. Or when that topic you're about to teach it, look out for this.
Right.
In my classroom, I've used a lot of thinking routines from Harvard Project Zero, and they really encourage students to analyze multiple perspectives before forming their own opinions. So it allows students to share what they've experienced up to that moment, but then kind of gives structure and helps them understand that their view on the world is not the only view. I think it's really important for you to kind of just focus on how using some other routines and being proactive could really help out when trying to have these certain conversations. Now, I know I've been talking a lot, and Kelly, you probably have a lot of things that you're doing in your classroom. So let me know what you're doing.
So in a specialized unit, we have a curriculum for unique that gives us history units that have like community workers and things like that, since I am in a younger grade level. But we do also have history lessons like timelines. We do a lot of history timelines. And then there's stories that tell us about, so we typically do a story that has like a person or somebody of from a passage about somebody from history, and then we do a writing passage or talk about it as much as we can, since communication is a bit of a challenge in my room. Um, Communication looks different for all of my students. So that's really where we're at. I really want to focus on more um, scaffolded levels of getting that to all of my students and all of those concepts to them.
Yeah, that word scaffolding. Trust me, you're gonna hear that throughout your whole teaching career, and that could be really difficult at sometimes. But it's great to hear that you're both integrating civics in your work, because civics education could be very, very overwhelming. So I always tell teachers, start with what your students know, kind of like what Sam was talking about bridging past situations to current events and making that connection, building that bridge to see the relevance in whatever the topic is, especially if it has something to do with the past in civic education. So I think that community rules, school elections, local elections, and connecting concepts to the world of the students really gets kids engaged and they really feel connected. You know, they feel as if they are part of whatever the learning is versus being sent the message, right? They're part of the experience versus them just receiving the experience.
No, I like that a lot, because just the other day I was teaching a lesson on Black history, and it was Rosa Parks, if Black and white people could sit together. And it's just me and one student in my room that are white. And I was like, do you think me and this student should be able to be in this room with you guys? And they all said no. And I was like, I don't think you guys understand all of the layers to this. So I think coming in with a better understanding and plan would have helped me out in that situation. Um, Another challenge for me is that my students often struggle with those, like all those levels. What are some strategies to help with make civics more concrete for them?
Ooh, that is that's a tricky one, especially for students with special needs and such a young age. I teach third grade as well, so I'm in the elementary range. For those younger students, especially with learning differences, You can definitely tie civics to their personal experiences, decision making in the classroom, roles on the playground, being part of a team. I often bring a lot of my personal life. I have two younger brothers. I'm the eldest. So I talk about how I had to make certain decisions and they don't always agree with me. And there's a lot of pressure as the eldest. And kids usually have siblings. They can relate to that. They can relate to family members, even relate to their parents. So when I tell my personal narrative with the kids and how I'm able to persevere and figure things out in a very democratic way, it helps students remember those moments because they have re-mentioned a lot of situations that I've talked about in my own personal life. And then activities that incorporate storytelling and role playing. You get kids, like I said, part of the learning versus just bombarding them with all these words and all these stories and things that just aren't sticking. You know, it's like spaghetti when it has to be al dente. You could throw it at the wall and it sticks on there, you know? So you have to just be able to have the kids feel enthusiastic. So, for example, when discussing government and topics like that, reading from the text, there's no connection. But if you have a class vote for a class mascot or a class president or maybe a grade president, and then pushing them, motivating them, facilitating them in a way of trying to actually make some change, they become very enthusiastic. You can role play town meetings. You can even prepare them for that. And then students are going to take those skills and use it at home. They're going to try to be democratic with their parents. I've had students who are trying to get bearded dragons at home because we've practiced persuasive speeches and persuasive essays. So, yeah, they're trying to get very creative at home as well. I'm not saying it's successful, but they are using those skills.
No, I like that idea a lot. I feel like if I had used kind of a role playing situation in the example that I used earlier, I think maybe it would have been more of a concrete way for them to relate in that moment since it was kind of a fresh idea.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that too. And like from a history teacher standpoint, sometimes it's easy to get stuck in the rut of like, because it gets me excited, right? I'm like, oh, we're gonna look at these primary sources and different perspectives and sometimes it's hard to remember that when I was 12, that would have bored me and like I wouldn't have felt connected to that. And it made me think of a scenario recently. We've been learning about the Mali king in Africa in the 1300s, Mansa Musa. And one of our questions was like, is there any responsibility um, of the wealthy to support the people that they are in charge of? And a loaded question, and we had a lot of layers to that, but we're talking about Mansa Musa and a journey he went on, a pilgrimage he went on, and he's like giving out gold to people. And one of my students is eating hot Takis, and he just gets up and starts walking around and he starts sharing his talk like he's pretending to be Mansa Musa,
Mhm.
and he's passing out like he's like, oh, I'm Mansa Musa, and he's passing out the chips. And one, he was sneaking the hot Takis because I don't for that period particularly, I don't allow food. But like I just let it go because it was hilarious and everybody was super engaged with it. And it's like it was like I need to be more intentional of creating those moments and not relying on the 12-year-olds to do it because I should be taking more charge with that to get them more engaged with the lesson. So I definitely see what you're saying of how they will be more engaged when they see not only that it's more fun, but they see how it connects more to the world through participating in that kind of role play scenario you were saying.
Yeah, something that I heard you say, and I don't want to butcher because I'm a teacher, I'm not a butcher, so I don't want to chop up what you just said, but you said you had a question in there that you posed to the kids. I guess are the wealthy just um, the wealthy, do they have a responsibility of sharing their wealth? Can you say
Correct.
your question again, the way
It
that you worded it?
was it wasn't like our like guiding question, but it got brought up for a couple of days because we were looking at all the wealth that Mansa Musa had.
Hmm.
And we started talking about um, do the wealthy have a responsibility to help the people they are governing over
Wow.
since he was a king? And
Wow.
yeah, and it's not like, I mean, again, this is a seventh grade classroom. We had interesting discussion. Now it's not like, we're sitting in a, college auditorium with people writing papers and debating each other, but like it was fun. And what made it a lot more fun was that specific moment of that
Mm.
student, bringing the lesson to life with the role play and making, you know, pretending their hot Takis were gold that they were giving people through their journey.
Yeah.
And um, I think I need to be more intentional to think of how to incorporate more of that to bring those lessons and those themes alive a little bit.
Mm. Yeah. You know, well, you don't know, but I'm going to tell you. In my class and with my whole approach with teaching, I've used a lot of inquiry-based projects that really make civics come alive. And as I've been saying, get kids really connected. So when you do those type of activities, you want to make sure that your students are prepared for the conversation first, and then, but as you have highlighted that moment, right? That is something next year when you get back to this point, your brain is already intentionally going to say, "Hey, let me get something ready for this because I know I can elevate this part of this unit." So, first, I think it is setting clear discussion norms, definitely having respect for different opinions, backing claims with evidence, and listening actively because throughout a lot of civics topics, there are going to be a lot of opposing opinions. There's going to be a lot of heated emotions. So, really, I would even say this can occur in the beginning of the school year when you're setting up norms for the classroom, of having them practice certain ways of discussing certain topics. In the beginning of the school year for third grade, I had them debate about peanut butter and jelly. Is a hot dog sandwich, or is it something else? So forming it in a light way first in the beginning of the year, setting up that structure gets kids into routines and just getting them prepared when there are topics that might be more engaged, especially with emotions, right? That they might have strong opinions about. So it's really, really good to do that in the beginning of the year, but then also when you come back from a break, especially winter break, because coming back from winter break is kind of like you starting the year all over. The kids just forget where they. It's like welcome back to school. So I think that you're doing a great job in setting up a lot of those structures. Will definitely enhance the civic experience.
Absolutely. So you mentioned, setting these clear expectations, and you said starting light, so when the heavy topics come, they're kind of adjusted to the norms and such. Um, and kind of adjacent to that, those heavier topics, um, one that's really important, and I think, we all struggle with not knowing all the answers sometimes and how to do that, but when these heavy topics come, for example, I had a student who, well, one, I'll kind of backtrack. So with, all the language and rhetoric coming out of, our current administration regarding immigration and ICE, we've been trying to have really intentional conversations of how, none of that is funny. And because one thing about 12-year-olds is, man, do they think everything's funny, right?
Hmm.
So we have, these things they're hearing, in the news or at home. And, we have quite a high population of immigrant students, particularly Latino immigrant students. And, we have jokes being made about ICE. And so we're trying to have these conversations, but, behind what may appear to be 12-year-olds, innocently making jokes, you have real students who are worried. And,
Yep.
one student came up to me and, asked me, she was like, how would you feel if, um, I wasn't here anymore? Like a real, and she was like upset about it. Like, I don't know if she was worried at all about that actually happening, or just, based off what she's hearing, was she just curious? But like, that's a really heavy topic. And, I've struggled with this because, one, I we did have the conversation about, norms regarding that language, and, talking about appropriate language and supporting our classmates and whatnot. But two, there's a part of me that felt like, I had a responsibility to dig deeper with this and really push the thinking of the students. But I've been really hesitant because I'm just not quite sure if the maturity level is there. And the last thing I want to do is try to push something that they may not be ready for. And then, kids get hurt in the process unintentionally.
Mm.
So do you have any advice, if, or what is your opinion? Like, do we as educators, even with, you're with third grade, I'm with seventh grade, even with younger kids, do we have that responsibility to push them in that capacity? Um, if so, what are strategies to do that? If not, what are other ways to, maybe more subtly address that? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
That is a great question. And it is very relevant and it's very real, especially for people who are passionate and connected to the kids. So, my view on that is that there are different things, as I was saying, kind of with the norms and all of that to do in the beginning of the year. However, they can always come back and you can always take, listen, your admin might not like this, but you take a day to do certain things. A lot of those conversations also require SEL skills, which there aren't any national standards. SEL skills aren't on a standardized test, right? But the ability for kids to laugh, right? Especially middle schoolers, they'll laugh when they are embarrassed, when they are having other feelings, right?
Mhm,
Laughter isn't always connected to joy and happiness.
mhm,
Laughter is a reaction to something else, and they might not have the vocabulary. There might be, especially in middle school, peer pressure where they don't want to take a risk in being vulnerable in front of their peers.
mhm,
So personally, what I do in the beginning of the year and even during morning meetings every day is we talk about how we feel. And there's like a whole poster with all these different emotions, right? And for kids that aren't great with the vocabulary, for the younger grades, there's four categories, right? There are colors. You could say, I'm feeling in a red zone, yellow zone, blue zone, green zone. And within each of those zones, there are different emotions. And I have an additional poster that has facial expressions for each one, right? So sometimes a lot of kids outside of school don't have that practice. And if we as educators don't aren't proactive and do not take any steps into addressing certain things, then they're either they're most times they're gonna hear it from a peer. And it's gonna be something that isn't well researched. It's not gonna be all factual. You're just hearing it from a friend, right?
mhm.
And they're gonna take that and they're gonna use it as reality. So I really think that number one, being able to have conversations about emotions, one, different emotions, having even for middle schoolers, they need visuals. Two, creating certain scenarios. Maybe it could be 5 minutes a day. There are different scenarios that in the scenario there's a character that feels harmed or is embarrassed and having the kids role play, do a little skit, right? And just for them to get of course they're gonna be joking about it at first, blah 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 blah. But then what I do with my students is when my students do these little performances, they give feedback to each other. So some kids are like, that person was being silly up there, but they were supposed to be showing um embarrassment or anything like that, right? So having their peers kind of judge them and give them feedback is another way that alleviates the the role of the teacher, because after a certain time, everything that we say is blah 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 blah. It's kind of like in the peanuts or something, right? So I think practicing those, and diving into that, then sharing your own personal stories about your own life where maybe there was a moment where you had a friend or you were in a certain situation where you laughed about something, but it was actually serious, right? And that afterwards you had learned a lesson. Like there was uh, a lesson, a moral, something that came out of that experience that made you a better person, right? So I think it also takes the teacher to be vulnerable, to have students become more vulnerable, and then expressing emotions, right? And it's going to take time. It's a
Mhm.
learning curve, right? But eventually, also their peers will kind of check them, like, "Yo, that's a real situation. Why are you joking around like that?" And they'll tend to kind of shift because they care more about their acceptance amongst their friends versus teachers.
Right.
I hope that all made sense.
No, that definitely did make sense. And I, admittedly, haven't taken really much time at all to do the like feeling sorting. And it makes a lot of sense because in so many scenarios, they are displaying emotions that signal to an adult something probably completely different than what they are actually feeling.
Hmm.
And then that can lead to, misconceptions, not only from the teacher-student perspective, but from the student perspective. And then that could cause problems when trying to have a real conversation. So that ongoing work of having them just um, practice those different scenarios, could definitely help. And that's something that I'll start to be more intentional about, and definitely starting next year, and try to gauge like, all right, next year around March, where are they at with, identifying their emotions in the classroom, and and having those conversations. So no, thank you for that.
Don't even wait till next year. If you're
Yeah,
not
right.
doing it daily, try it once a week,
Yeah.
right? It's Wednesday play day or play time or whatever, where they have a little skit, they're performing it, and it's the consistency, right? It's good for those students to get a little sample of it, but it's also good for you to realize how students are reacting to it. So then come again, top of next year, you're like, all right, these were some of the successes. These are some of the things I'm not even going to try again.
Yeah.
Talking about successes and not successes and kind of um you guys were talking about the focus from the student's point of view, but to kind of center it back on like a teacher's point of view, um we started our Women's History Month this week, and I was like, do women have the right to vote? And again, a kid said no, and this particular student I know kind of maybe veers that way a little bit. And so how, as a teacher, would you go about when a student disagrees with like your own personal beliefs? How would you go about teaching them to be respectful to everybody's beliefs, but without getting yourself in trouble?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. So there are certain topics that I'm very stern on, right? Where of course you let kids have their own opinions and you can ask them, what makes you, why do you think that? Do you think that that's right? And there's some kids that are just very rigid and they will keep on going. And at that time, they're trying to agitate other students and they might get a thrill off of that, or that's what they feel. And as because they're kids, they're getting that from somewhere else, right? So it's not as if this is 100% their thoughts and ideas, but it just takes a level of, this is something that is very serious, right? I understand that sometimes we all have our different opinions. However, all people needed to be treated equally. All like, and that even for middle school, it just takes unity within the class of, hey, this is what we believe as a class. This is what is truly, you know, something that is positive and and should be highlighted. So, you know, talking about different rights, it is tricky when you have certain kids that will not budge, and you could become curious. Are they getting it from their family? Are they just doing it to get a thrill, and get other people emotionally driven? So I would think that it's best to kind of do a little bit more investigating, but also maybe pulling that student aside and saying, hey, look, I understand you might feel like this, and I'm a little bit curious of why you feel like this. It kind of hurts my feelings because I'm a woman, and there's probably a lot of other girls in this class that really would like to do things that all the time people think that they can't do. For Women's History Month, I've been showing videos every morning about women who have done things that are courageous and breaking these type of stereotypes that they had. Showing videos about the other day, I showed about this woman from, I believe she's from Baltimore. She is the oldest competitive weightlifter at 80 years old, and the kids were like, "Damn, she's buff." She could lift all of us at the same time. Like they were motivated. Then I had a kid today, a boy, who was like, "Yeah, I wanna have my own. I want to be a personal trainer for kids. I'm gonna write a plan for third graders and fourth graders and fifth graders." They could get motivated by these stories of women. So if there is a student, that's another thing. If there's a student that's saying that women can't do that, I think it's up to the educator to then show examples of women who are persevering, who have grit, that break all of this, right? So eventually that kid, no matter how much they say it, in their brain, they're going to say, wow, I just saw this woman do that. I just saw a lot of examples. They can't run away from reality at that point, you know? I think that sharing the personal experiences with the students and really talking to them one on one, especially if there's one student who is trying to be opposing of the positive views, is and can help that student, right? Um, but then also when there are opposing views that that it's not the student, especially elementary and middle school, like they are getting this either from home and also with the internet, they are getting all of this information, all of this information. So I would just say just remember that. Just keep that in your mind. Like this is not this kid's fault of all the data and information that they're receiving. They don't always have control over that. So acknowledging that not every issue has a clear solution may feel a little bit pessimistic, but also is pragmatic. So at the same time, it's essential to provide the students with some hope. So once they learn about these women, of just having a list in your classroom, these are the women that we've learned about. So then they can always look back and say, well, women are weak. Well, don't you remember that woman that we just learned about last week? What did she do? That's her name, and that's what she did. Yes. So I really think that sharing those videos and examples can really help them out. Something else that I kind of wanted to talk about was that staff meetings and district wide professional development sessions, you could definitely connect with other educators, just like what we're doing right now. So I don't know about you all, but in my district, a lot of things are virtual. But meeting people online, or even if somebody says something virtually, that can really, really, really assist you both with finding peers, colleagues, even mentors of getting more information from. Um, yeah, and while every teacher is not passionate about civics education, it's very important for us to still be curious, build a community of like-minded educators. The AFT does a perfect job. Look, the AFT, we are connected because of the AFT, you know? So these type of networks, local, nationally, in different workshops can really help valuable connections and resources.
Kind of on that topic, but on a different topic, just a personal question for
Sure.
coworkers that don't respect or like value the civics and the identity of the students that you serve. How do you go about that? And like specifically in my case, a lot of people don't understand my students specifically since we are in an autism unit and they are a minority base.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Huh. I'm a cyclist, right? And a lot of drivers get angry at cyclists. And the reason why is because a lot of drivers have never been in the role of being a cyclist and having to share the road. They lack that perspective. So the only perspective that they have is based upon their own experience, right? You're annoying, you cyclists, get off of the street, go onto the sidewalk. You go onto the sidewalk. The pedestrians, you're annoying cyclists, get onto the street, right? If everybody had an opportunity to have these different roles, they would be more empathetic and more understanding of those different roles and what you have to do in those roles. So I bring that up to say, with your colleagues, especially the ones who probably never taught or interacted with students on a spectrum. So with colleagues like that, I would ask my principal or my admin if I could lead a PD kind of informing people, hey, you know, these students are part of the school community as well. Let me tell you a little bit. Even offering role play situations, right? Where these are real situations where these adults have to act and play out certain scenarios that a student will be on the spectrum to kind of get them to be in those shoes. Then also, I would ask my admin or even go to certain teachers of being intentional of doing certain collaboration. In my school, we have um, MES students, which are medically, and the acronym is escaping my mind. However, these are students that have very severe learning disabilities. Most are nonverbal in wheelchairs, and there's a partnership every single year between the fifth graders in that population of students. So it's not as if they're seen in isolation or other, they are part of the school community as well. So I think it takes collaborate. Even that's like a small effort, right? Of you can make something annually that goes throughout the year with another grade or another class, whatever teacher is receptive of doing that, right? And then the way that you get other people knowledgeable, you know, you could ask to lead a PD, or you could send a podcast or an article, a video here and there. And you're not gonna get everybody. You're not gonna get everybody, but you could just start to catch a few people, you know? That would be my suggestion, because if you are passionate about working with that population and just students in general, it could eat at you. Like, why don't these people understand? They say they care about kids, they work with kids, but like I said, it people are limited from their perspective if they don't take an opportunity to actually take these other roles. So hopefully that was helpful.
That was, thank you.
That's also too from just the civics perspective, like so much of real life civics is having the skill set and willingness to put yourself in other people's shoes. And you know, from the teacher standpoint, that's something I definitely try to get my students to do, and we do units and then I forget about it, and you know it's kind of choppy and need to be more consistent, but also you know it's easy to forget. Even that's a hard thing to do as an adult oftentimes.
Yeah.
And like we expect it's funny because like, I'll be teaching and I'm like, why aren't my 12-year-olds willing to do this? And then I'm like, well, why aren't like most adults willing to either? So like I guess that's just kind of a reminder that how important that skill is because so many people, I'm including probably all of us here at many points in our lives, either don't do that or forget to do that or don't really think about it. And having kids, practice that is critical to the civics aspect of things.
Yes, definitely.
Well, we've reached the end of our time together, and I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. Raphael, you provided such great insight into including civics into any teacher's education. And I hope that anyone listening was able to pull some of those resources, maybe for your own classroom. And we'll include some links and some tips from Raphael in the blog connected on Share My Lesson. And of course, once again, I want to thank Sam and Kelly for joining us in this conversation. Hopefully, you also got some great tips, and I think we've all learned from the things that you're already doing in your classroom. So join us on Share My Lesson and join us next time here on Welcome to Teaching.